step back and think, right, what do I actually need to do here? What structure do we actually need as a business? What do we need to do? How do we scale this properly? Where do I even start looking through these CVs? This is just impossible. All the decisions were shit decisions. They were like, it was just degree of how crap a decision it was.
What toll did this take on you personally and mentally?
The irony that actually this is a total 180 of the situation that we thought we were in, which was, yeah, you're right, they won't work with us because we're high risk. Actually, no, they're high risk.
Today's guest is someone who knows what it means to build fast and burn out even faster. Richard Lee is a business mentor, non-exec director and former founder who led his digital tech company through 650% growth during the pandemic. But behind the explosive success was a reality many founders relate to: constant pressure, overwhelming responsibility, and eventually a total mental crash. This is a powerful and practical conversation about leadership, growth, and choosing yourself before it's too late. Richard, hello. Welcome to Leaders in Disguise. How are you doing?
Yeah, good, thank you. Thanks for having me.
I'm going to dive in straight away, if I may, because there's so much to get through today. I'm going to start off by getting a bit of a snapshot about the business. So could you just give us a bit of a sense of the business that you were so successful in, that 650% growth that I've mentioned in the intro? Tell us a little bit more. What was that business?
Yeah, so the business was StreamGo. It's a digital events technology platform. So it was started in 2016. Running webinars and webcasts and live streams of conferences for clients. It has an entire software as a service, like digital technology platform that allows clients to run their events themselves, or have some managed support from the business at the time when I had it.
Software as a service. I'm just going to jump in there, and I was listening to somebody else's podcast the other day and realised we can get lost in terminology.
Yeah, software as a service.
Am I ultimately saying it's a platform that people can use? It's a piece of software that they can use.
Exactly.
Using your service, yeah?
Exactly, yeah. It's aimed very much at the enterprise end of the market, so fully brandable, fully customizable, like tracks tons of metrics around user engagement, etc. So you can lead score a person based on how long they watch your webinar for, etc.
So live streaming, a really interesting thing that we now see in 2025. When did you start the business? Was it 2016, did I say?
Yeah, I started the business in 2016. I would say, I've been streaming content since 2011 at a different company when I was an employee. But yeah, 2016, we were growing about 100% a year between then and COVID happening in 2020. Definitely seeing some pushback from clients that didn't really see the need to stream their content or didn't see the need to do webinars. You know, it was very much a new technology. Event managers, etc., were scared of it. And then obviously we went into COVID and everybody wanted it all of a sudden.
And we'll get to that probably shortly, if that's okay. But I was curious of where did this idea come from? You said that you were in employment, you had already seen streaming. Where did it come from, and did you plan it to be a business, or was it a bit of a lifestyle kind of hobby?
No, it was definitely a lifestyle. I was working at a business that wasn't too dissimilar, where I looked after streaming a team that went out and streamed conferences worldwide. I was sitting on the management team of that company, and then got some, probably in the last 6 months, product responsibility before I left. That company was very much focused on making the product as cheap as possible at the time. You know, I remember the CEO was like, we need to work out how we can sell this for $50 a month. And I just really was not in that game. I felt like the value that was being added was too much for that. I couldn't see how we could sell it for $50 a month because our costs were so high. And really, that just wasn't for me. I was moving more and more away from doing live streaming into a much more management role. And I kind of had the idea that actually, you know, some of these clients were signing up for a year of 10 events a year, etc. At the time, I thought, you know what, I just need to win one client like that, and I can work a day a month or a day and a half a month and earn 3 times as much as now, and then just potter around the rest of my time. And that's how it started.
a bit of a lifestyle business.
It
But
was always intended to be a lifestyle business.
it's just, I guess it's that hard thing, isn't it? And there's so many people I know right now that want to go out and start a business, but getting that very first client is a big milestone to get. But of course, you've been in TV production, advert production. Is that the right terminology
Yeah.
for quite a while? So I imagine you'd built some contacts of people that you knew already.
Yeah, I had some contacts. I think I was quite lucky. People quite liked working with me. I built a website, and amazingly, that actually started getting like semi decent amount of inbound inquiries through it. I don't know absolutely nothing about SEO or anything, and probably nowadays it'd be much harder to do that. But yeah, so I started to get some inquiries. I was really focused at that point around filming and streaming a piece of content, so usually a conference or panel discussion, but started to get more and more inquiries for webinars. And our class of webinars, at the time, people dialing on the phone often and then presenting with slides, or doing the same thing but with webcams instead. That wasn't really an area I wanted to focus on, but I think I went into a bit of panic when I first started the business of, oh my God, I'm going to have no money. Oh my God, I've got no clients. Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. So I just worked every inbound inquiry that came up, whatever that inbound was. So it might have just been doing a tiny bit of filming. It might have been, in the sweet spot, which is what I wanted, which was live streaming, or it might have been just doing webinars. And so I did some webinars. That area of the business started to grow. We started to get more inbound inquiries for that, and therefore ended up taking on a member of staff in 2017, like January 2017, and a salesperson. And I think the empire started, as it were.
I love that phrase, the empire.
It definitely was an empire, but that's how it started.
Yeah. I guess it's that, it's interesting, isn't it? That reflection moment where you say, do you know what? I can just go and work a few days a month and I can pay the bills. I can go on holiday. I can enjoy life and, still earn the same amount of a wage. And then suddenly you go, crikey, it's a business now. I've got to start employing people. And then did you want it? When it came along and the opportunity presented itself?
I think yes and no. I think when I was first starting the business, one of my friends was very much, you could build a really big business here. And I was like, no, probably not. Like, that's not really in me. I don't really want to do that. That sounds really risky. No, that's not really what I'm after. But I think that maybe that bit of encouragement plus starting to get traction is what built it. And I think, I employed that first member of staff. Well, I employed a salesperson in 2016, largely to help. It was a really junior salesperson. That didn't work out. It was there about 6 weeks, didn't really work out. And then I got this inbound in the summer of 2016, which was for about 50 webinars a year from a big publisher. I worked that inbound quite significantly. And then suddenly when that closed, it was like, oh my God, well, I can't do 50 webinars a year by myself. Oh my God, like they're going to want to do webinars on the same day that I'm like out streaming a conference. Like, this is not going to work.
Yeah, there's only one of you.
Yeah, exactly. This is not going to work. So yeah, I employed someone at that point, knowing that I had secure revenue that could cover their pay for at least a year. And that, I guess, was the springboard. But actually, even in the first year, the business was quite cash generative. I managed to get quite a bit of work quite quickly. So I remember I was on this accelerator scheme that NatWest ran at the time. Was even before NatWest ran it. It was called Entrepreneurial Spark. NatWest now run it, took it over, and I was just like never there. And I remember applying to stay on the scheme in like February 2017, and they were like, well, you're never here, like what's going on? I was like, yeah, well, I've been really busy. And then they looked at my financials and were like, oh my God, I didn't realize like your like turnover's like the biggest in here. Like, I didn't realize you don't really see. And I was like, no, I just get my head down. I'm not really in the game of trying to talk myself up. I just get my head down. They're like, oh, I understand now why you're really busy and you're not here. I was like, well, yeah, it's quite hard, like turnover couple of $100,000 in, and one person, like, and I'm traveling
It's
quite a bit.
it's an interesting word, isn't it? I've done quite a few accelerators. I remember being invited back when they said, you were on the very first pilot one. Can you come and talk about how you've scaled your business, how you've grown your business? And accelerator almost feels like the wrong word, doesn't it? Because I don't know about you, but what I needed then, and certainly I probably do, I know a bit of an insight into this. Actually, what you need is somebody to sit down and start working with you to scale, and not kind of, you were already accelerating, maybe that, but sustainably maybe was the word that was missing. Is
Yeah,
that
you
fair?
need, and I agree. And I think what you need is a mentor or someone that can just see the stuff that you can't see when you're just stuck in the weeds a bit. And I joined that scheme. I joined so loads of schemes in early 2016. I was like absolutely desperate to get a mentor, someone to help me, just to steer me. Well, not even to steer me, just to try and help formulate some ideas, I guess. So I joined that scheme. I also was just about to turn 30, I think, that year, the year after. And Prince's Trust had a scheme which got you a business mentor, and they would support you till you were 30. And that scheme then went for 2 years after you were on the scheme. And I got a mentor through that who was actually really good. But actually, the accelerator scheme wasn't really that amazing. I think they probably can be amazing if you're surrounded by people that are similar or are at a similar space in their business. But actually, what I've found from a lot of accelerators is there's a lot of people sometimes there that want to talk up their business and make it sound like they're doing amazing things. And actually, for me, that was almost quite demotivating, because I would always think, oh, like, they're doing so much better than me. And actually, it was actually the other way around.
Yeah.
But because they're much more confident and assertive and have a real belief in their business, they make it sound like their business is massive, when actually it's not, and it's not really going anywhere at all. So I think sometimes, I think it could be really useful if you're around similar businesses that are growing. But actually what you find is that sometimes it's a lot of startups, and a lot of startups that maybe don't have a business there.
It's complicated, isn't it? The
Yeah,
world of business. Like, you
it's
might be
hard.
going 1, 2, 3 employees, but they might be turning the same turnover in the same amount of business as you, but they've got no employees, and it's really different to be
Yeah.
able to find the right match. And I can relate to that. I've been in groups of peer groups of people talking about business, and they're in manufacturing and I'm in professional services, and that doesn't work for me in my eyes.
Yeah.
What I tend to find was that they were all talking about people. That was their problem. That was their
Mm-hmm.
scale up problem.
Mm-hmm.
And I was in HR, people consultancy, and I felt like I was giving them all the advice, and they didn't really have any other problems than people,
Yeah.
which can be quite frustrating. I'm going to jump forward, if I may, a little bit then, and I guess talking about people and talking about a scale. And I've got a note here. So talk to me about your inbox during COVID 2020, 4 years
Yeah, so
properly into
things just,
business.
I mean, firstly, like, obviously things started in early 2020. The business didn't really ramp up until like lockdown time, March time. But I did have a member of staff who was a new salesperson at the time, and oh my God, he was obsessed by COVID. Like, all he talked about was COVID in early 2020. And me and everyone else in the office just thought, why are you obsessed about COVID? Like, I remember he went and got a COVID test probably mid-January 2020 after he'd been to London because he had a cold. And I was just like,
Yeah.
what? Like, oh my God, like, this is not going to happen to us. We're in the West here. This is not going to happen. Like, we're not going to be in lockdown. Like, and he was like, it's going to change our business. And I was just like, I don't think so. And then, so yeah, things went a bit crazy in that March. We started having tons of inbound inquiries, and the workload changed and the type of work changed. So predominantly we're doing, maybe streaming one conference for a day and maybe making up to 10 web pages. And we were then suddenly doing really large digital conferences. And I remember I did one in April 2020 that had 190 pages pretty much. And our head of marketing at the time was like, oh, wow, there's some more pages on our website. And I was like, oh, wow, this is why this has felt so much work. But yeah, I was getting about 600, 650 emails a day for about 6 months, every day. It was absolutely exhausting. Some of them, just needed a really simple reply. Some of them didn't need really anything doing to them. Others had several hours worth of work in them. And I felt every day that I needed to clear that inbox, because the next day I get another 650. I remember my partner at the time was like, well, can you just leave them? And I was like, no, not really, because then like in 3 days time I'll have 1,800, and then, well, where do I come back from that?
It's interesting how we look at the landscape at that point. The first word that comes to my mind is Zoom. So when I look at Zoom, they just went crazy. I think
Yeah.
I'd love to be able to sit down on a couch with somebody working at Zoom when they go, we suddenly had to scale and scale quickly.
Hmm.
But of course, for them, that was a huge success for their business. Obviously, Microsoft Teams came along, and lots of competition later on. But at that point, they were scaling fast. And I make that comparison to your business and other businesses where employees were furloughed, where people were, closing their business, and they were relying on furlough to pay those employees, and grants from the government to keep bills paid ultimately, and keep rent paid, etc., whatever it might be. You were absolutely, and I can relate to this from the HR point of view, we were crazy busy, but and not anywhere near what you're talking about, those 500-600 emails, and fast as well. And I'll throw into here, being a professional speaker over the last year now, I know that conferences are planned 6 months, 9 months in advance. They're not talking to me until they've even found a venue. But you were literally talking to people because they're going, we need to do a conference tomorrow. We've got to
And
move
I
it
think
online.
that's how it was so intense, because, if you've got a 2-day conference, you've got your attendees, they've got that time in their calendar already. Most customers wanted to keep the dates of their conferences or their large events the same as they were going to be when they were in person. So, now someone would, like you say, would be thinking about 6 months' time for their digital event platform, what platform I'm going to use, etc., etc. They were like, my conference is next week, it's in 2 weeks, it's in 3 weeks.
If we were not
So,
planned for this.
so you end up building these huge digital experiences in days rather than months, which was really, really tight. I look back now and I just think, like, you just wouldn't do that. You wouldn't be making a 190-page, like, totally branded online experience with like 70 sessions in it in 3 weeks. It just wouldn't happen now.
How was decision making for you at that point when you had to
Impossible.
call? Yeah.
Impossible. Like, all the decisions were shit decisions. They were like, it was just degree of how crap a decision it was. There was no good option. Like, everything had a cost, and it was just trying to weigh up what was the least worst option on the day. And I think that continued pretty much all of 2020 into 2021. Like, every decision had a consequence, but I actually didn't have any time to really think about decisions. And I think, looking back at that time in the business, the one thing that I really wish I had was someone to say to me, you have to get yourself out of this and think more strategically. Because I think my natural instinct was to delve in and start helping the production team that were dying with work, to try and get through some of the work, when actually what I probably need to do was to step back and think, right, what do I actually need to do here? What structure do we actually need as a business? What do we need to do? How do we scale this properly and for the long term? But that just wasn't possible.
Is it that stepping back and becoming a leader opposed to being a team member at that point? Because I think that's a really hard balance to get.
Yeah, and I think I was leading, in that I was making decisions, but I was too involved in the weeds. Part of that was because the workload was really high. Part of that was because the type of work we were delivering was much more complex, and part of that was because we didn't hire new people quick enough. But like most people, I kind of thought this was going to go on for about 6 weeks. And even when we did try to recruit, even that was a nightmare. Like, we'd advertise a role and we'd get like 300 applicants in like 24 hours. So it was like, oh, where do I even start looking through these CVs? This is just impossible. There's just so much noise here. So even getting people was really hard. And I've never really known anything like that, getting so many CVs. But I think so many people were out of work, so they're just applying for everything. But yeah, I think stepping back would have been, in hindsight, the best thing to do, and would have allowed me to make much clearer decisions. But I also think I wasn't really aware of how big the business had got so quickly. So I think I was still making decisions very much around a bootstrapping mindset, when actually we didn't really need to bootstrap anymore. And I think I was therefore making some decisions that to save cost, when actually we just didn't need to do that. We could have spent, and I was thinking about one, well, a couple of days ago. I remember we had a supplier that provided the video player and the platform. We were paying them pennies, don't know, a couple of $100 a year, very little. And then because our usage had just skyrocketed, I didn't even know there was a usage cap on this, by the way, because
You never needed to.
we never needed. And then suddenly their salesperson's on the phone to me going, "Oh, I want like 10 grand off you," and I was like, "No, we'll just build our own from open source stuff." But I only had a finite amount of dev resource, so I spent time getting that done to avoid a 10 grand bill, when actually that set us back from getting stuff done that would have made some of our customers stickier and would have solved some other issues that were affecting customers. But, 3 months earlier, 10 grand would have been a significant chunk of revenue. So that's, but I hadn't got that through in my head. And that's probably because I was too in the weeds, and probably because it happened so quickly.
Yeah.
And probably because I couldn't really see the cash. We had a bit of a problem at that time around late pays, where we'd invoice, and most customers were usually paying on 60 days, but then weren't, because they all had cash flow problems because of COVID. So actually we weren't actually sitting on tons of cash. It wasn't really until much later, like October 2020, that we started to really see the cash we were sitting on exponentially increase. And that was largely because we'd become much, much stricter with customers, seeing that they had to prepay, because as soon as we delivered the event, we lost all leverage over them.
Yeah.
So, and given that we were so in demand, we were like, why would we do an event if you haven't prepaid us? There's no point in this.
It's a bit.
We might as well just do an event for someone else.
It's all about being reactive, and
It was
to a
all
degree.
reactive.
But if you had a client and that said to you, working with now, if you have a client with you and you know that they're struggling for debts, or you were keeping on top of, I've done it before, where I know that I've had a notification where it's come through and said this company's credit scores dropped dramatically. You're probably going to say, "Hi, I've noticed your credit scores dropped dramatically. We need upfront payment." They can't really argue with that, and you've justified it. You're not nasty with it, but you're going to say that. But of course, when you're thick into the, like you say, the weeds of it, you're not really thinking about.
Well, I think also we were working predominantly with enterprise customers, large publishers, really large banking technology companies, like £1 billion turnover companies in some instances. And actually, in part of the negotiation steps with the sales team, they would often regard us as a high risk company because we were much smaller. And so we would then often buckle to say, okay, you can pay on whatever terms you pretty much want, because you're the company that you're not going to go bust. But actually what we saw with some of those big businesses was they started having to negotiate payment plans post us delivering events. And that, as we got into 2021 and we started just pursuing legal action against several of them, because they basically just kept delaying, stalling. And I remember saying to our head of sales at the time, I was like, wow, can you believe that we buckled to them because we were the high-risk company, and actually they're now the ones that can't afford to pay? I was like, the irony that actually this is a total 180 of the situation that we thought we were in, which was, yeah, you're right, they won't work with us because we're high-risk. Actually, no, they're high-risk and can't afford to pay. So it was a bit of a... a bit of a weird one.
What toll did this take on you personally and mentally, being in that business at that time?
It was absolutely exhausting. I'm a pretty anxious person anyway. I've had quite a bit of CBT for anxiety and various like forms of stress and stuff in the past. And I think it was just absolutely exhausting. I think the workload wasn't actually the worst part. I've always been in businesses that have been very date and time orientated with deadlines. So advertising, which is where I started my career, was, your ads on tomorrow at 11, end of, like it not being on isn't an option. So I don't think the workload, even though the workload was awful, was the worst bit. I think the worst bit was that because things were changing so quickly, there was instances where events and stuff were going wrong, and I always took when things went wrong and having an awkward conversation with the client or a critical conversation with the client as almost a personal attack on me. And I think that felt really awful because I felt like I went almost full time into just dealing with crap. And that actually meant my perception of the business was that the business was in a really bad position. And I think it probably wasn't in a bad position, but when you just deal with shit all day, you think the business is shit.
Yeah. And you can't. You need
You're not dealing with the
you.
nice bit, and you're not watching the nice events, and you're not getting the nice feedback. You're just hearing the bad stuff because bad stuff tends to rise to the top. And the workload was so intense, stuff was falling through the gaps, and we'd done a ton of work on process before COVID, but our processes weren't fit for the new size of the business. So I think, yeah, it was a bit of a nightmare. Like absolutely, I was exhausted. Like my sleep was terrible. I was like told from my partner was really difficult to live with and really, really bad. And it was really stressful. And I think it led me to making not good decisions for the business, not good decisions for the people in the business, not good decisions for me. And then we went through that 2020 period into 2021. And I think because I was too in the weeds, I hadn't noticed that there was a huge rise of competitors at that time. And actually, when we started hearing of some of these new competitors, everyone is dog kind of built a digital events platform in that period. Like I remember my colleague referring to them as like, oh, it's just another Me Too, it's just another Me Too, it's just another Me Too, it's just another Me Too. And loads of them we'd done demos to, our sales team had like been speaking to, basically told them all about our product, and then 6 months later they were developing a rival product with a much bigger marketing spend. And I think the other thing that I didn't do at the time was invest in the sales and marketing teams. In June 2020 we pretty much turned the tap off on sales. So I was like, well, why would we get more salespeople? Like, I've told our current salespeople not sell, and I've put such huge restrictions on them to stop them selling that why would I get more of them? Like, how demotivating would that be? Getting a salesperson to tell them, okay, great, but like you can't sell anything. And we didn't scale the marketing team. So I think, in hindsight, that those are things we should have been doing in 2020 in the preparation for things changing, but we didn't. So it just led to this huge uncertainty over the year. We're coming out of the pandemic. The clients were trying to go back to physical events. Partly, there was a lot in that early 2021 of people holding off on signing up to stuff because they hadn't committed to their conferences for 2021. So it was a bit of a...
When did you step back? When was there a point where you said, actually, I need to stop, as you said, in the weeds and being in there? Did you at any one point say to yourself, I need to take some time out, I need to step back and actually review things?
Yeah, so I think I had started to step back and become much more of a leader in 2021. But equally, the other leaders we then had in the business were new leaders. So there was still quite a lot of stuff rising to me. I had some customers that I still had to handhold in that period. Largely customers that were either really large value or very complex events, or had events that had gone wrong and I'd managed to salvage that relationship and therefore felt that I needed to pay them a bit more close attention. So there was still some of that going on. but I think I definitely was starting to move back. But I don't know if part of the reason I kind of fell out of love with the business was that I don't know if I was just tired, or I didn't really like being away from the coal face. I think probably it was that I was tired, and yeah, so I had definitely stepped back at that point, quite significantly, but I think I was probably so waylaid, and I feel like the marketplace was changing so quickly that it was really hard to think strategically. I still felt very, very reactive, and I spoke to an old business mentor who wasn't mentoring me at the time during COVID in like 2022, and he kind of implied to me, he was like, okay, so you've got your fishing pond, people are chucking some pebbles in and they're skimming the top of the surface, causing a bit of ripple in the fishing pond. He's like, but what's just happened to you isn't that. It's like a meteor's just hit the fishing pond, and then everything splashed everywhere. And he was like, that's probably happened like multiple times over the past 2 years. He was like, which is why you're feeling absolutely weathered, and also why you didn't feel like you could think strategically. He was like, because these seismic waves were just constantly hitting that marketplace repetitively. And that's the same for a lot of marketplaces in COVID, but I think this marketplace in particular was particularly difficult. I look back and think probably should have got investment and scaled the business like really big at that point. Personally, don't know how I would have done that. Don't think I probably would have been able to do that myself. But I look at like competing businesses like Hopin. They took on $1 billion of investment in a year.
It was interesting. Now, when you were talking about it, I was thinking to myself, great, I can see the business growing. I can see it turning into something. I can see the revenue increasing. At that point, albeit, let's put the customers not paying thing to one side, you go, great, I don't need investment. I'm doing really well.
100%,
but actually,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
It probably is a time when we don't think we need investment, but we do, because we need to double down on that and really grow. Inject that money because you're doing so well. You need extra cash to invest in marketing, to invest in that development and get people in to do it right, and then scale up. And I think it's really interesting that you mentioned it. I think many people forget that.
And I was getting loads of letters and emails and stuff at the time from private equity firms, etc., corporate financiers, and I just used to think like, well, we don't need investment, and I'm not looking to exit. Why would I exit? But I think in hindsight, probably did need investment. And even though we actually at one point had, we're starting to be very cash generative and had quite a bit of cash, and we could have invested like cash in building the teams ourselves, I think I was still stuck in that mindset of, and couldn't really get myself out of that mindset of, okay, we went from, well, like I remember it's September 2020, we didn't have any project managers at all. That role just did not exist. A client went from the sales team to the production team, and the production team dealt with them the whole way through. That just didn't work anymore, because the production team were on video calls with presenters all day, every day, helping them present and dealing with the tech of their presenting. So we're like, right, okay, we need like project management team. So we got a project manager, I think in mid-July 2020. Early September 2020, we had two project managers, and the head of sales is like, well, I think we need more project managers. And I was like, well, we can't possibly need more project managers. We didn't have any like 6 weeks ago. Now we've got two. Like, how could we need more than that? It's just not possible. We just can't. Like, who was doing that job 6 weeks ago? Nobody was doing it.
Yeah.
So how can we not have enough capacity now? We must have enough capacity now. And I think I didn't get over that mental block of actually, well, we do need more people now.
Done differently then, and I'm looking at the time, and we're running out very quickly, and I knew this was going to happen. It always does. We should always do like part 1, part 2. But like looking back and reflecting back on that business and to where you are now, if you'd done things differently, do you think that business would still be running in a way? Because hearing the conversation that we're having, it's like, oh, COVID was busy. People are still using Zoom.
I mean, that business is still there now. It's smaller than it was. It's in a slightly different direction. I personally like got out of that business and pretty much handed it over to staff very quickly, some of those staff that had been there from the start, because I morally felt like that was the right thing to do. I remember when I was trying to get out, and it took me ages, and I like flipped and flopped on this decision for ages. You know, people saying leave, and then I took 3 months off, and I was like, oh, I might get back into it. Came back, it just felt the same. It's like, I'll push on. And then I was like, I just don't want to do it anymore. I just don't want to do this anymore. So I was like, I want to be out of this as quickly as possible. And I was really conscious that I wanted as little collateral damage as possible from me getting out. So I could have sold the business, but that wouldn't have got me out quickly. And I could have just closed the business, but that felt like they had a lot of collateral damage to some clients that had been there quite a long time, to staff members that had been there quite a long time. So I opted to come up with this solution, which meant I got a bit of a lump out of the business, and hand over the reins to some staff members. And, you know, they were like people that had built the platform from scratch, etc., that I felt quite loyal to. But, you know, had things been different, would I still be in the business? Maybe. Yeah, it's hard to tell. I think that period in COVID really dampened my enthusiasm for that business. And I think that's largely because it was so intense, and, you know, I had a lot of things go wrong and a lot of difficult conversations over a lot of time. And I think nobody cares about a business that you founded as much as the person that's founded it. I remember having this conversation when I was like passing the business over to staff. They were like, oh, but like, I've seen you're really stressed about it. And I was like, yeah, but I care probably a bit too much. And I don't think you'll ever care for that same amount, because ultimately, if we lose a customer now, I see that as a personal, like, judgment on me. I was like, actually, I don't think you will ever have that same problem with the business, because you don't have as much history on it. It wasn't all yours from the start. So I think that does open up different doors.
How does recovery look now for you personally? We mentioned the phrase when we had our call before today about that PTSD of work and that business, and you've moved on, as you say. Now you've exited that business, you're moving forward. I think now we can drop in that you're working with businesses to learn those lessons that you'd wish that you'd had hindsight on. I don't think, by the way, having sat with you now and gone through this, you ever could have had that hindsight because you were so in the thick of it. But what does recovery look like now for you?
Yeah, so I think my approach to work is quite different now, and my approach, and things have changed for me. I sit much more at a strategic level in businesses now and organisations. So do a bit of non-exec director work for charities and businesses, and advise business leaders as they're starting to scale, predominantly in technology products. And I think that comes with a good and a bad. Sometimes it's a bit frustrating, and sometimes I just want to go, oh my God, like, let's just get the shit done. You know, I'm a bit of a get stuff done person. And sometimes people can just not be doing that. And you can see a really clear path forwards that we could do now and make things better. And I think the sitting on boards is also very different. I think when I first started sitting on boards in 2022, I remember I joined the board of a charity, and I've seen it in part, and I was like, oh my God, like, I'll be really weird, won't I? Like, I'm not really like a middle-aged guy in a suit that's been in consultancy services probably forever. Like, I'll probably not really know what I'm doing. And actually, it quickly became apparent as I joined that board that actually I could understand what happened in the board quite quickly, and I could see opportunities in organisations from a very different perspective to others. And I think I've realised that's a bit of a superpower now. But I think, you know, I went into that thinking, oh my God, like, they're going to see me in the first board meeting and be like, right, get out. And I also don't think, I'm not an amazing person at reading and taking in significant quantities of written information. And that first board meeting I went to, I was sent like 380 pages to read of A4. And I was like, oh my God, like, I need to read all of this in 4 days. It's about an organisation I don't really know anything about pretty much. And oh my God, this is like more than a book, because books don't even have full A4 pages, and they're 380 pages. And then I quickly discovered that was outside of the norm, and that was like, oh, this one-off board meeting where all this stuff had been happening, and I was like, oh, okay, right, okay, it's not going to be like this all the time. But yeah, it is very different, that relationship now with providing advice rather than doing is very different. And I think sometimes it can be frustrating. Sometimes you want things to move faster. Sometimes it's hard when the person doesn't get the risk or the opportunity that you can see. But I think what I do like is learning a lot about different businesses. And I think, I fundamentally always thought I only really know about video and tech, and I wouldn't really be able to advise a different type of business. And, while I probably couldn't advise a manufacturing business, what I have fundamentally realized is across all different sectors, actually there's quite a lot of stuff that's the same in running a business. The product might be different, but actually most of the problems are the same. And it's the same problems come up over and over again. So, I met someone the other week that's developing a tech product for the grassroots music industry venue business. And I was like, oh, do you know what? Like, I don't know anything about music, nothing at all, nothing about venues. But actually, I can see how there's stuff I could help you with in this business, and I can see how I could help unblock some bits that you're struggling with. But I don't have to know anything about that sector. Yeah.
How do you protect your mental health now then? Because I can hear it when we spoke, and I can hear it there, that anxiety probably still exists with that, what you went through. But of course, it's even more important than ever that we protect our mental health.
Yeah, I think for me, what I really learned from doing CBT is that the amount of anxiety is almost like a mathematical formula. So it's to do with how high the stakes are and how uncertain the situation is, gives you how anxious you feel. So ultimately, I can't control how uncertain things are in life and in business, but what I can control is the stakes. And I think when I had my own business, the stakes were really high to me. In many ways, monetary terms, you taking risk essentially with your own cash. I think in terms of the repercussion on you, and you're the one going to have a lot of those awkward conversations with clients, with staff, etc. So I think the stakes felt really high. Now being a kind of step behind that in organizations, the uncertainty is still there, because business is fundamentally uncertain, but the stakes are not as high for me personally. And I actually attended an event recently with Sarah Davies, one of the Dragons. I thought it was really interesting. It's a take on corporate finance I hadn't come across before, which was, she described her husband, who is part of that business with her and is an accountant, as the most risk-averse person she's ever met. And she was like, I just want to run at the business. I wanted to make it bigger a few years ago. I just wanted to run at it, probably about 8 years ago. And she was like, but he was like, oh my God, well, you could do that. You could lose us everything. And so what she suggested was that they sold part of the business to a corporate financier, which meant they ended up with a massive lump sum, which was their personal wealth. And she could then run at the business almost untethered, because she didn't have this. She had risk, but she didn't have all of the risk anymore. And I thought that was a really kind of important strategy that I hadn't come across before, but seems like is quite common. And I think it de-risks the person, which allows them to take more risk in the business, because they are slightly less, they're not going to lose the house over it. And I think that is a strategy that probably would have worked really well for me.
One last question I wanted to ask you, if I may, was what, out of everything we've spoken about today, what one thing would you like people to take away as a reflection from your own experience that you've gone through, that they need to be doing in their business right now, listening to this, or looking after themselves perhaps?
Well, I think both those things. I think in their business, they need always have someone potentially external or in the business that can think strategically. That could be them, but ideally it would be someone as well as them, because you need someone to just sometimes have a conversation with you and say, do you know what, you're so in the weeds right now, you need to think about, what about this? And I think be receptive to those conversations when they happen. You know, I feel like I probably would have been receptive if I'd had someone say that to me, but I didn't at the time. And I think really trying to build some time into your week to do that, you know, even if that's an hour on a weekend where you sit and you think, right, where's this going? What's happening here? Like what because if you do it monthly, a month's quite a long time in a rapidly changing business. And I think having that space to think strategically is really important. And I think having probably a bit of a boundary between the business and you is really important personally for your own mental health and your own well-being and those around you. And that's really hard when business is going through a massive period of change. But I think it is really important, because if you're ultimately at the bottom and exhausted, you're not making good decisions for the business, and that impacts people in the business and your customers and ultimately you. And I think sometimes we get stuck in making decisions when we're exhausted because they have to be done, but that's not a good time to make a decision.
Some really good takeaways there. Thank you. I think, yeah, people use that word self-awareness, but do you know, it's a real skill to have self-awareness in those moments, and having somebody externally to drag your head out of that sand, that you're in that ostrich effect, you drag yourselves that you're out of the sand and just look around you and point those things out to you are so important. Thank you. I've really enjoyed talking to you.
Yeah, it's been a great chat.
And I definitely think we need a part two. How can people come and find you online? Are you on LinkedIn? And
you can look for me on LinkedIn. Richard Lee's the most common name ever. So you're probably better off looking at me through richard-lee.co.uk, because then you'll get to the right LinkedIn. But yeah, happy to connect with anyone. Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, we'll put some comments in the show notes so people can find you. Of course, we'll share this wherever we possibly can do. If you want to come and sit where Richard sat, then drop me an email, hello@leadersindisguise.com. I do actually read them. They come through. I was going like the team reads them and my amazing PA Hannah reads them. Hello@leadersindisguise.com. Be great to hear your story. You know, good, positive, challenging, whatever it might be. And yeah, some great lessons learned today. So thank you very much.
Cool. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.